When I was 12 years old, a fateful night occurred that will haunt me for the rest of my life.
My parents and I were traveling through one of the national parks, marveling at the wildlife, trails, plants, streams, and mountains. As evening approached, we arrived at the campsite, set up our tent, ate dinner, and went to bed. Although there were about 15 other tents in the camping area, the camp grew silent as darkness fell. However, we were not destined to sleep that night. A frantic scream shattered the night's silence, ending as abruptly as it began. Fearing the worst, we left our tents in a state of panic, unsure of what to do. Other hikers around us spoke of grizzly bears that were known to inhabit the area. Suddenly, we heard rustling in the bushes, and someone or something was approaching our tents without pause. I felt a cold sweat run down my back, certain that something creepy had happened in the night forest. Suddenly, we saw a dark figure staggering out of the darkness towards us. Nay stumbled towards us like a drunken man. Then with a terrible cry, he fell upon his face. My father and I rushed forward, covering about 50 yards, and turned him over. It was clear that he was dying, with glazed, sunken eyes and dreadful, livid cheeks. For a moment, a glimmer of life came into his face, and he uttered a few slurred and indistinct words with an eager air of warning. The last words, which burst in a shriek from his lips, were "the devil's mane." Despite being utterly irrelevant and unintelligible, I couldn't interpret the sound in any other way. Suddenly, he lifted himself halfway off the ground, threw his arms up, and collapsed onto his side. He was dead. The sudden horror of it left us all paralyzed, but a few tourists remained alert. It quickly became clear that we were witnessing an extraordinary case. The man was only wearing his overcoat, trousers, and unlaced canvas shoes. When he fell, his overcoat slipped off, revealing his torso. We stared in amazement at the dark red lines covering his back, as if he had been severely whipped with a thin wire scourge. The instrument used for punishment was clearly flexible, as evidenced by the long, angry wheels that curved around his shoulders and ribs. Blood dripped down his chin as he had bitten through his lower lip in the paroxysm of his agony. His drawn and distorted face conveyed the terrible pain he had endured. We called the police and anxiously waited for their arrival. I couldn't help but wonder about the dangers lurking in this place. What was this devil's mane? Who or what lived here? What deadly threat awaited us? The gloomy and silent forest kept its secrets hidden, and every sound made me shudder with fear. Later, my parents revealed the tragedy that had occurred in this place. The man had been attacked and fatally wounded by a super pig, a wild boar of enormous size. These hybrid monsters from Canada tunnel under the snow to infiltrate the northern regions of the country. It was discovered that in the late 20th century, wild boars and regular pigs were crossbred to increase meat production. However, this resulted in the creation of a massive, highly intelligent and elusive creature weighing up to 300 pounds, known as super pigs. Farmers valued these creatures for their ability to produce more meat. Unfortunately, some of these super pigs escaped into the wild and began breeding, adapting to temperatures as low as -50 degrees Celsius. These mutants pose a significant threat to the environment, as they consume crops, destroy trees, kill turkeys, deer, and elk, pollute water, and can even be deadly to humans. Every time I think back to that night, I wonder what that unfortunate man experienced as he faced a huge monster all by himself in the woods. And why did he call his killer Devil's Mane?
My name is Jane, and after my parents died, I decided to move into their house. In the beginning, everything went well. The neighbors were friendly, I got a job as a teacher, made friends, and never felt lonely. In my free time, I liked to sit on the porch and read my favorite novels. However, next door was an old abandoned house that had been empty for quite some time. One evening, as I sat on the porch, I heard a soft whistling sound. At first I ignored it, but it seemed to be coming from the abandoned house. From that day on, inexplicable things began to happen. One night, I even thought I saw a light come on in the windows of the abandoned house. I had a feeling that something terrible was about to happen. I felt like someone or something was watching me, so I shuddered at every creak or sharp sound. The constant whistling on the back porch was driving me crazy. Although my friends told me I was imagining it, deep down I knew someone was following me. Finally, I decided to put an end to the nightmare. I went to the empty house to find out the truth. The porch made a terrible creaking sound, and although the door was unlocked, it didn't budge at first. When I entered, I found the house empty and unoccupied. As I walked down the dark hallway, I noticed traces of dust and cobwebs everywhere, indicating that the house hadn't been used for years. After calming down a bit, I decided to call it a day and turned to leave. But then I saw something that took my breath away and made me cringe. There was a photo of me. The photo was hanging on the wall next to the door. I don't know if it was real or if I was imagining it, but I heard the nightmarish whistling in my head again. I was horrified and scared and ran for the exit. The door was locked. I screamed and pounded on the door, but my strength failed me. I fainted. The last thing I remember is the long shadow of someone on the floor. I don't remember how I managed to escape from that damn house. I woke up on my front porch. I spent the night at a friend's house. I left the next day and never returned to that scary place. When it happened, I had been working at a gas station in our town for over 2 years. I loved my job and the quiet life in the sleepy town. And I didn't expect the reality of horror movies to break into my life. The night shifts at the gas station didn't scare me in the least until one incident. It was an autumn night in the last days of September, and the storm blew in with unusual force. All day long the wind screamed and the rain pounded against the windows. As evening came on, the storm grew stronger and louder, and the wind wailed and sobbed like a child in a chimney. It was my night shift. Suddenly the door opened, and a man in a leather jacket came in, muddy raindrops beading off of him. He had a band-aid covering his face from eyes to cheek. He didn't respond to my greeting. He just stood there staring at me. It was a scary look. It really scared me. A shiver ran through my whole body. Suddenly, the night visitor looked away and walked out. The next day, I learned from the news that there had been a fatal accident the night before. A motorcyclist had missed a curve at high speed and crashed. I recognized the motorcyclist as my nighttime visitor. From that day on, the nightmare began. In the evening, I was at home watching TV. Suddenly, the cat sitting on my lap turned to the window and hissed. I saw a figure slowly approaching the window. I could see the vague outline of a leather jacket, but I couldn't make out his face. I stared tensely in his direction, not knowing what to do. He stood in the yard for a few minutes and then suddenly disappeared. Such visits were repeated every night. Sometimes when I came home after my night shift, I would find dirty footprints and water droplets on the floor. They were everywhere, as if this stranger had crossed the entire room. Once, when I saw the ghost in the window, I shouted out, "What do you want? You're dead! You're dead! Go away!" It was a cry of despair. The figure disappeared. I no longer saw the ghost, but that didn't mean the nightmare was over. Traces of dirt and water droplets continued to appear regularly in my house. I started getting messages. They were words written in chalk on the front door of my house. "I'm waiting." They appeared and disappeared suddenly. It was as if the words struck me with fire. The police laughed at my story. They thought it was a child's joke, but I knew it wasn't. One day an old woman showed up at my doorstep. She was dressed in dark clothes, her face half hidden by a deep hood. She was waiting for me, sitting on the steps by the front door. "There's going to be a big storm tonight. Give him the mirror," she said. After these words, she got up and left. A small black-rimmed mirror was left on the steps. In the evening of that day, a rainy storm broke out, just like that first night. I opened the window, lit a candle, and put it next to the mirror on the windowsill. I spent that night at my sister's, and when I came back, I saw that all the mirrors in the house had been broken. The little black-rimmed mirror was nowhere to be found. And then I realized that the ghost of the man who had died on the road that fateful night would not come again.